Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay today. I don't know how long this one is going to go. I don't think it's going to go long because I have a few videos that I want to get to today. But I want to do this. It's odd. It's weird. I'm sorry. I'm checking my sound. I'm bad at doing two things at once. Guys, if you enjoy what I'm putting down, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the content and the show through Patreon. Donald Trump is going to meet with Kim Jong-un. You are going to see a lot of bitching and moaning and complaining and wringing of hands and wagging of the finger. Oh, Donald Trump is going to meet with Kim Jong-un. You're going to see all sorts of this stuff from people on the left who supposedly are humanitarians, the people who are supposed to be pushing for this thing of peace, bemoans the president who's going to try to make some level of peace. Whether he's successful or not, I don't know. I don't really care. What I care about is the fact that he's willing to go. Whether he stumbled into this, whether he did this intentionally, I don't care. When Obama stumbled into the thing where Assad got rid of his chemical weapons, good. I didn't care that he stumbled into it. I care that it was taking place because I care about the fact that there's more peace in the world because of it. What I do know is Donald Trump not meeting Kim Jong-un means there is no chance for peace. Donald Trump meeting with him allows for the opportunity and the chance. I will take the opportunity any day of the week and twice on Sundays. And the people who are wagging their fingers and everything else, those people have somewhat of an agenda. When Obama went to push through the Iran deal, you had naysayers and people who didn't want him to get a win under any circumstances. And I suspect the same case goes with Donald Trump talking to Kim Jong-un, even when the point of this, or the potential for this, is a reconciliation between North and South Korea. I have no expectation of Kim Jong-un giving up his nuclear weapons. He would be stupid to do so. You've had people in the administration talk about Gaddafi and everything else. Democrats have put forth their own ultimatum of sorts in order to essentially try to tie Donald Trump hands on this, taking a hard line on this. They're doing this purely in order to try to make it fail. Do you think they're agents of peace or do you think they're political hacks? I suspect it's the political hacks. One of the things in the conflicts that have taken place in the G7 has been a lot of media hoopla about the personalities involved in Donald Trump having spats with Trudeau, or Donald Trump not getting along with some of the people who are there from the standpoint of the political leaders. Amongst all of this chatter and amongst all of this, back and forth about what's taking place, you might have missed something that's actually pretty damn significant. Donald Trump fighting for liberty, for the United States sovereignty. It shocks the shit out of me to say. You already know my take on Donald Trump. I don't particularly like Donald Trump. I think the guy's a maniac. But I do think when he gets the opportunity to try to fulfill certain campaign promises that he believes that he could fill, I think he tries to do so regardless of the political consequences, providing it doesn't conflict one of his own interests, if that makes sense. Meaning, no, he's not going to pass healthcare because he doesn't care about healthcare. Yes, he's going to be typically less hawkish on Syria because ultimately he doesn't necessarily want that to get us into a larger conflict. By the same token, he will go along with the political climate associated with Syria, meaning if a chemical weapons or if the perception of a chemical weapon strike, he will strike just because he would go along with the political climate. Very hawkish on Iran to the point where this may actually come to the point of a war. But one of the things that he talked about in the campaign trail was NAFTA. When he took office, he put a bullet in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And me on the show came out and said, hooray, good job, Donald Trump. One of the things that I hated, that I absolutely hated in the Trans-Pacific Partnership was an investor-state dispute settlement. One of the things that people may miss with all of the hoopla and all of the personalities that are taking place, meaning that are taking prominence in the media, is that Donald Trump is trying to opt out of the investor-state dispute settlement for NAFTA. Now, what this means, the investor-state dispute settlement, is that a corporation, a multinational corporation, can sue the United States government if one of the laws, or if it believes one of the laws run afoul of its ability to make profits. If you have an environmental law in your particular state, say you pass an environmental law in your particular state, you could be taken to court and may potentially have to pay that corporation for a law that you passed in a democratic way that was in the best interests of your population. Philip Morris took Australia to court because it didn't like the way that Australia was essentially labeling its cigarette packages. That's fucking amazing. They lost that case, fortunately. But when you do a breakdown of the number of people who win and lose those cases, what you find when you look at the details is that the investors come out better than the states. You don't really have to do that breakdown, though. You can look at all of the news and all of the push for investors trying to get Donald Trump not to do this. How many times, at which point, has corporate America come out and tried to fight for something that was best for regular workers? We're out here fighting for the workers. We need to be paid less. We need to pay more in taxes. We need to do things that creates more regulation for us to safeguard either the environment or worker protections. That never happens. That never happens because those things adversely affect their profit. The democratic process adversely affects their profits. If you need to do things to not dump sewage in the water, to not dump stuff into the air, well, you may have to take on or add more into your cost factor to do such a thing. Well, you may not like that. If you're a multinational corporation and you're engaging in business in another country, and that country starts putting in laws that protect their civilian population, you may not like that. And the very threat of an investor-state dispute settlement can weaken those laws, not to mention losing a case. Donald Trump, part of the pushback, or part of the kerfuffle, part of the fight, part of the feud, was that Donald Trump wants to opt out of this process. And you have a ton of business leaders who don't like it. The fact is, Sanders and Elizabeth Warren agrees with him on this. Because at the end of the day, this fundamentally undermines democracy. Imagine a situation where your country, your state, your localities pass a law that's in the best interest of you and your own. Maybe to protect your water, maybe to protect your air, maybe to protect you as workers. And a company takes you to a foreign tribunal to get rid of that law, or at the very least to sue you, so you will have to pay that company money. It undermines democracy. Whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, when he's making this argument about sovereignty, or he's making this argument about national security. National security is a little weird. Sovereignty makes more sense. The opt-out provision that he's trying to add to NAFTA is essentially what's taking place. Investor-state dispute settlements. I am not saying I'm an expert on each and everything that these guys are talking about, but this is one of those things that Trump is trying to, I guess you could say, live up to. This is, you find this, it takes a little work to find because all of these places are complaining about it. But ultimately what you get to is business complaining that Donald Trump is changing the rules. And part of the complaint, again, has to do with investor-state dispute settlements. If you look at what this guy is saying, this is the Hill. I've read like 2 or 3 of these articles at this point, all saying the same thing. Protect our money, protect our investments, protect our investments. What you run afoul of in this case is democracy. Business has an uneasy relationship with democracy. It doesn't particularly like it. Alright, here we are. So Matt Stoller puts out a tweet. Unlike Europeans, Canadians have some really good reasons to be angry at Trump. The steel tariffs are not fair to Canada, but Trudeau is also holding up NAFTA negotiations to preserve the most monopoly-friendly pieces. A reminder that Trudeau is fighting to preserve in NAFTA a privatized court for global multinationals, opposed by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Donald Trump. These politics are weird. Do not get suckered. Two countries' resistance to the United States' plan to change the system known as Investor-State Dispute Settlements, or ISDS, could lead to its removal altogether from NAFTA, as neither Canada nor Mexico is interested in allowing countries to opt out of the system as the United States has proposed. The United States made the proposal with an eye to opting out of the ISDS system, which it says erodes the sovereignty of the United States by allowing multinational corporations to circumvent domestic courts. That's true. That's completely and utterly true. Under the dispute mechanism, arbitration panels now hear complaints from corporations that overseas investments were unfairly treated by an action by another NAFTA government. The system is widely backed by multinational businesses because it allows them to avoid lengthy court battles and potentially discriminatory treatment abroad. It allows them to circumvent the democratic process. That's what it boils down to. That's why they don't like it. If corporations are screaming at the top of their lungs that they don't like something, I tend to look at why they don't like it. And oftentimes, I know that corporations are working in their own best interests, so I tend to feel that we, as a collective, need to work in our own best interests. This idea of arbitration, when you are taking arbitration for a job, the Supreme Court has just passed a ruling that allows individuals who are forced into arbitration in order to get a job to not be able to combine their lawsuits into a class action lawsuit. Meaning you, as a singular individual, would have to face that corporation on your own through arbitration. The more arbitration that's taken by a particular company, the more chances for that person or for that company to win, for obvious reasons. It's repeat business. The corporation is paying for that particular arbitration, and the corporation paying for that particular arbitration, you would imagine that there's an incentive for that corporation to, or the arbitrator, to lean towards the interests of the corporation. The more that an arbitrator works with a company, the higher the win rate for that particular company. It's somewhat different from the standpoint of international politics. I'm just trying to make this point. Do you really trust arbiters, or do you trust your courts? Would you prefer this to take place in your courts based on your own laws, or would you prefer this to take place in a system organized by the top 1% by multinational corporations for the interests of multinational corporations? This is the government's explaining what it is right here, even in their own words. While investor-state dispute settlement does not provide additional substantive rights related to U.S. law, it does provide an additional procedural right, the right for foreigners to choose impartial arbitration rather than domestic courts when alleging that the government itself has breached its international obligations, whether by discriminating against a foreign investor, expropriating investors' property, or violating the investor's customary international law rights. What you're talking about is ignoring nation states. You've essentially destroyed and dissolved the nation state to allow something like this to take place. You've essentially allowed a coup d'etat. This idea that arbitration takes place and your own domestic courts and your own laws cannot necessarily do anything to that particular arbitration. That is amazing. You've essentially said that the multinational corporations, in an odd way, what they can do supersedes United States law. No country in their right mind that's working in the best interests of the people of that country would allow their sovereignty to be undermined in such a way. And yet, Obama, Clinton, many of the Republicans, many of the Democratic Party is perfectly okay with this taking place. You have a captured political class. Do not misunderstand me. Donald Trump is just a Republican. Donald Trump, for all intents and purposes, for all of his bluster and everything else, the difference between Trump and the other Republicans is one of tone. He may take an additional policy now and then that may be slightly different, but there's always permutations in the way that politicians go about their affairs. In this particular case, Donald Trump screamed in the top of his lungs about NAFTA and the TPP. Put a bullet in the TPP, and now fulfilling, I would imagine in his mind, one of his campaign promises, trying to opt out of NAFTA. or at the very least the ISDS of NAFTA. He is right. It does undermine state sovereignty. And part of my issue with the Trans-Pacific Partnership was that it undermined state sovereignty. And by state, I just mean the nation state. And as for the win rate, right here, there's a reason that corporations are pushing for this. Were you in on the negotiations when this was being signed? Think about it. Who was in the room? Were you in the room? Was one of your representatives in the room? Or were the people who were in the room when they were making these trade deals essentially people who were co-opted by the political class, co-opted, and a bunch of corporations and a bunch of plutocrats coming up with deals that were best for them and rules that was best for them, with the extra bonus of being able to supersede the laws of the nation state? We gave away our sovereignty. And NAFTA, we tried to give it away in the TPP, and to some degree for the World Trade Organization. We've given away our sovereignty. The opt-out provision of the ISDS is, in a small way, I would imagine, trying to take it back. And by the way, that's not an absolute. There are all sorts of ways where we undermine our sovereignty. But in this very specific case, I give them credit for this, depending on how this goes through. And again, I don't know the totality of everything that's taken place from the standpoint of the negotiations here. And clearly, it did not go well. But the media has focused so much on the personality issue that they completely ignored, or almost ignored, this particular part. The idea that Donald Trump is going against the ISDS, something that was pushed in his campaign promises. I don't like Trump, but I do try to give him credit when credit is deserved, seeing that everybody else tries to take the piss out of him. I was greatly disheartened by the media coverage of him going to see Kim Jong-un. It gets across, in fact, I'll do that in another video. This is, who wins more, investors or states? Now, before you even look at this, think about it. Just think about it. There's enough wealth that was made last year to get rid of poverty 7 times over. Have we gotten rid of poverty by any? No, we haven't gotten rid of poverty. Businesses do what is in the interests of business. Plutocrats do what is in the interests of plutocrats. You have untethered this idea from the amount of money that people make with the violence that takes place from a standpoint of poverty and not being able to provide state services. This idea that corporations have been able to influence our politicians, be it Democrats and Republicans, to lower taxes while at the same token cutting services, while at the same token borrowing. Instead of raising taxes on the top 1%, we've allowed our debt to go to $20 trillion. Think about that. $20 trillion. Instead of actually saying we're going to tax the top 1%, these people who make magnificent amounts of money, we're going to tax wealth as if wealth was property. Corporations are not human beings. Instead of having sane policy from the standpoint of taxation and services that we provide to people, so people aren't necessarily going into massive amounts of debt, so the government itself is not going into massive amounts of debt. That's not what takes place. That's not what takes place. The political class is a captured class. That political class requires large amounts of cash to get elected. Their power base is the very people who, for the most part, need to be taxed. That power base is not going to give them profits. It's not going to put money in their pockets from the meaning politicians. If those politicians run on a platform that says, we're going to lower our deficit, we're going to tax the 1%, and we're going to make sure people have the things that they need so the individual human being is not going into massive amounts of debt. But you can see the problem here. The very people that need to be taxed are the very people who are paying politicians. If you know this, that business functions in the best interest of business, the plutocrats functions in the best interest of those plutocrats, that they do things to magnificently advantage themselves, even if that advantage is at the expense of everyone else, because oftentimes it is at the expense of everyone else. then before I even show you this, you already have an idea that if these guys are pushing that hard for it, Mitt Romney called Obama every name but a child of God, but Mitt Romney came out and said Obama needs to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the president is right for trying to do so. There has to be a reason why plutocrat Mitt Romney, who's a venture capitalist, who's perfectly okay with ripping companies to shred, firing people, and magnificently enriching himself, these unempathetic human beings, the plutocrats, if they're pushing so hard for this, they're pushing hard for this for a reason. They're not pushing hard for it because they lose. They're pushing hard for it because it gives them extra procedural powers against nation states. It undermines the power of nation states in favor of multinational corporations. If you already know this going into it, you already know what I'm going to say from the standpoint of who wins more, or at the very least, who is advantaged more by these rules and laws. Who Wins More, Investors or States? By Howard Mann, Senior International Law Advisor. On June 24, 2015, the United Nations Conference on Trade Development released its World Investment Report 2015, Chapter 3 of the report provides some new and most interesting numbers on investor-state dispute cases. Who wins, how many cases, and when. Following UNCTAD traditional methodology, the total number of concluded cases is broken down between settled state wins and investor wins. Arbitral decisions and jurisdiction and merits are thus accumulated without distinction. The application of this methodology results in the following numbers, also presented with the latest WIR. Investors 27%, settled 26%, states 36%. Well, that doesn't look all that bad. That's not all that bad. When you dig into the numbers, you get something else. Based on the annual numbers resulting from the UNCTAD's traditional methodology, many proponents of the system have argued that investor-state arbitration or international investment agreements in general are not biased against states because the United Nations' own numbers show that states win more than investors do. Supporters of the system have insisted that the simplistic argument to counter concerns that a state is biased against states. But what happens when the decisions of jurisdiction and merits are disaggregated? Looking at the cases determined based on final arbitral awards, the number of cases leading to final awards is 255 based on the UNCTAD numbers, 144 in favor of states plus 111 in favor of investors. It turns out that 71 of these decisions for the state were decisions on jurisdiction that terminated the arbitration. Assuming that all arbitrations face some form of jurisdictional challenge, which is almost certainly true, and in any event close enough to use as an assumption for presented purposes, out of the 255 jurisdictional decisions, states have won 71 or 28%. Investors, therefore, have won 72% of jurisdictional determinations. Taking out of the 71 jurisdictional decisions that terminated arbitrations, the number of cases decided on the merits is 184. Of these, investors have won 111 or 60%. Investors, thus, have won 60% of the decisions on merits. So, despite the often heard refrain that states win more often than they lose, it is the investors that actually won more of the time, most of the time. 72% of decisions on jurisdiction and 6% of the cases decided on merits. Essentially, this jurisdictional phase is the point of entry. If it is relatively easy to get the merits phase, it is more often than not worth a shot for investors, even if the jurisdiction is unclear. What they're saying is, you've allowed a path in which to essentially sue states. And you've given them more procedural powers to do such. And the win rate versus the loss rate is a hell of a lot better than the optics of these things. There is a reason why businesses are trying to do this, and it's not because they lose more often than not. Let's finish this part, the top part. The high win rates for investors here show the entry point is not the most significant hurdle. By contrast, if the win rate on the merits is high at 60%, it can lead investors to take the chance at jurisdiction even if the case may be weak on that issue. The combination of low bars of entry and high Win rates, precisely as seen here, is perfect for motivating investors, counsel, and third-party funders to initiate cases. Importantly, it also increases the effectiveness of threats by investors against states in response to potential measures. States may be considering adopting the regulatory chill impact of the investor-state arbitration system. You're in Vietnam. And let's say you're in Vietnam and you're an ambitious politician in that country. And you say, look, our healthcare system is not up to snuff. And because it's not up to snuff, we need to have a massive change in the way we go about affairs from the standpoint of healthcare. In doing this, the person makes changes, making more of a socialized medical system. A company who was adversely affected by this, maybe it was a drug manufacturer, maybe it was a supplier of medical devices, maybe it was a hospital, or maybe it was a company, a multinational company that was building these hospitals or something to that effect, takes them to court and says, look, we understand that you want to increase the effectiveness of your medical system. We get it. We're bleeding hearts. We understand. But you're hurting our profits. You're adversely affecting our profits by going through what you're trying to go through. And we don't like it. They may win that case. The very threat of doing something like that against, let's say, a weaker country may even stop that country from going through with certain political decisions that it may otherwise enact. This adversely affects nation states, which is why I'm against it. This undermines the sovereignty of nation states. Just saying. Just because Donald Trump is pushing it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. One of the cases, or one of the big name cases, Philip Morris cigarettes charged millions after losing plain package case against Australia. This was a case that Philip Morris brought against Australia. Philip Morris fortunately lost this case. But why on earth is Philip Morris allowed to challenge the laws of this country anyway? This was a law decided internally by the country itself. And the idea that a foreign national is going to somehow challenge this law, mind you, challenge it to try to get people to smoke more, causing cancer. Like I'm trying to get across to you the wildness of this. And the idea that you can challenge laws from this standpoint, even when it's in the best interest of the nation itself. This is amazing. And yeah, I think Donald Trump is right on this. So, let's see. Who's here? Wow, we have a lot of people here. Good morning, back at you. Luca Clemente, hi Wesley, Pat, everybody. What's happening, everybody? Wait, you're saying you're in favor of balanced budget? If you are saying then the government needs to tax 21 trillion out of the economy and render everyone broke and massively in debt. No, I never said that. You're making that shit up. I never said I was in favor of balanced budget at all. That's something you made up. Christopher Walk, okay, you guys are fighting. Danny Knapp, openly worked against them in the primaries. 21 million, are you fucking serious? No, 21 trillion is our debt. Yeah, we're up to $21 trillion in debt. 21 trillion. Trollson, I heard he's thinking about running as a Democrat. Who are you talking about? Sanders? Sanders is going to run as a Democrat. The Order of Chaos. Yes, the corporations have the chains taken off of them and they're trying to take it off. Trying to take it all as an understatement. They're literally trying to subvert and undermine U.S. law using these trade deals. That's exactly what's taking place. Whining about Trump will resolve this issue, my friends. I heard he eats steak with ketchup. He might have hots for Ivanka, racism, sexism. That's funny, God. Oh, that's hilarious, God. No. Could you make a video on foreign stuff? I do foreign stuff all the time. Joshua Rensall, the debt is being cynically exploited by the far right with collusion of Democrats' establishment to undermine the remains of social programs, public education unions, and remaining of barriers, corporate tyranny. Chomsky. Yes, that's true, by the way. Do you know, speaking of balanced budget, Democrats have come out with this no impact policy decisions, meaning that what they're going to do, they're going to try to match up each and everything that they do in order to kind of have this balanced budget approach to go into their policies. This stuff is nonsense. The debt is a creature of Congress. It's a creature of Congress. They're playing this and exploiting this, and they're going to use that to attack social programs. Democrats have taken the Republican line on this. Here's a newsflash. Republicans don't care about the debt, and Democrats don't care about the poor. They use those things purely for political effect, running on the political momentum of their past forebears. You had the FDR types, the bleeding hearts, the liberals, and if they really cared about those things, they would behave fundamentally differently. Just saying. You don't have Paul Ryan coming in and agreeing to a $9 trillion increase in the budget if Republicans care about the budget, an increase that they wouldn't do under Obama. If Democrats really cared about the poor, you wouldn't protect Wall Street while letting housing go bust. And to your point, Rob, I understand what you're saying. Me making a point of saying that the debt is $21 trillion, and part of the way that they got to the point of having $21 trillion was because, for the most part, they lowered taxes constantly, while at the same token borrowing the money from the people who they were lowering taxes on. Yeah, I do think you should increase taxes on the rich. I do think you should do that, not because you're forced to do so. I think you should do so because I think there's a problem in having that massive amount of income inequality in your society. Eat the rich. Yeah, I do think you should eat the rich. I think that money should be used for better things. Now, to your point, going with the MMT stuff, it is true that the president could take a coin and could make $1 trillion coin and sit that coin into the treasury. It is true that if Congress wanted to, Congress could tell, it could tell the Federal Reserve to pay down the debt out of his own profits. There are all sorts of things that Congress can do. I am working on the logic that the current public understands. The current public is not going to understand MMT. They don't even know what MMT is. And if you bring that shit up, they're going to recoil and run in the opposite direction. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't use certain strategies and policies in order to bring down the debt, introducing it to the public, but you can't necessarily do that in an overt way. Just saying. I understand your point, but I think your point is wrong. I got my mayonnaise ready. Kalita, get your mayonnaise ready. George Pagad, the debt is responsible for foreign policy, especially oil-rich nations. The petrodollar must be preserved, otherwise the debt is unsustainable, and deep spending cuts must occur. Yes, God, I love my audience. Fiat currency. The only reason we get away with this is fiat currency. Now, when China is talking about trying to introduce the what is called the yuan or something to that effect, and they're trying, Russia has been hoarding massive amounts ago, or been accumulating massive amounts ago. They're trying to put the world back on the gold standard. If they put the world back on the gold standard, the United States $21 trillion would no longer be this kind of fiat currency. It would need to be financed by a real thing. That would create a problem. That would create a massive problem. Look, I don't know if China is going to be able to change the world currency. I do know that that would be a massive shift in world order if they are able to pull that off. I think you're right. That would be a major problem. Christopher Wolf, damn, what you just said about Democrats and Republicans was dope. Working class, 602 West Phoenix. Well, it's dope and it's true. I mean, think about it. Think about what the Democratic Party has done. Ooh, my signal is going down. Alright, I am not sure what is taking place. Let's see. But I am losing my signal. Alright, I'm going to end this here because my signal is getting strange and it's not necessarily coming back. Let's see. Give me 1 second, guys. Petrodollar killed the discussion. Alright. Yeah, guys, I'm getting weirdness on my end for the standpoint of the signal, so I'm going to end this. I don't know if you guys are getting this part, but if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the patron. I'm sorry for the discussion ending. It wasn't my fault. The signal just kind of went down, so I will end it here. Thanks, everyone.